90 seconds, that's all it took to end the life of one of the most advanced aircraft ever built. A jet designed to outrun time, brought down before it could even leave the sky. Flames tore through its wing, 2 engines failing, landing gear frozen, and ahead, a hotel filled with unsuspecting lives. The world watched in disbelief as the Concorde disintegrated over Gonesse. But was this really just an accident? Or had the warning signs been ignored for years? Because once you examine the chain of decisions, oversights, and quiet compromises, the story starts to look very different. This isn't just how Concorde died. It's why it never stood a chance that day. Let's go back, minutes before that runway lit up. At Gate 45 of Charles de Gaulle Airport, Concorde FBTSC sat gleaming in the midday sun. It was a charter flight bound for New York, carrying 100 passengers, mostly German tourists heading for a Caribbean cruise, and a seasoned crew of 9. From the outside, everything appeared normal. But beneath that polished exterior, not everything was as it seemed. Just 4 days earlier, the aircraft had undergone routine maintenance. A landing gear beam had been replaced, but one crucial part, the 12-inch spacer that kept the gear properly aligned, was never reinstalled. It was later found back in the hangar, still attached to the old component. No one noticed it was missing. Concorde's load that day also pushed the limits. It was 810 kilograms overweight. The center of gravity was further aft than it should have been, nudged back by an extra 19 unmanifested bags loaded into the rear hold. On a delta wing aircraft like the Concorde, this meant reduced stability, especially at low speeds. Still, nothing raised alarms. The crew had not reported any faults. The weather was clear. Pre-flight checks were logged as normal. But there was one more problem, small but critical. Just 5 minutes before Flight 4590's scheduled departure, a Continental DC-10 took off from the same runway. During its roll, it shed a titanium wear strip from one of its engines. The part was barely 17 inches long. It was now lying unnoticed on runway 26 right, and Concorde was already taxiing. At 1400 hours, 42 minutes, and 31 seconds, Concorde Flight 4590 was cleared for takeoff. In the cockpit sat 3 highly experienced crew members. Captain Christian Marty, 54 years old, was at the controls, a veteran pilot with over 13,400 flight hours, including 317 on Concorde. He was also a decorated athlete, the first man to windsurf across the Atlantic. To his right, First Officer Jean Marco, 50, brought 10,000 hours of experience with over 2,600 hours on Concorde. Behind them, monitoring systems and engine performance, was Flight Engineer Gilles Jardineau, age 58, with 12,500 hours logged, nearly 1,000 of them on this aircraft type. They were one of Air France's most seasoned Concorde teams. Captain Marty advanced the throttles, the afterburners lit. 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus 593 engines unleashed nearly 152,000 pounds of thrust, pushing the supersonic jet forward with relentless force. The distinctive delta-winged aircraft surged down runway 26R. Passengers felt the pressure pinning them back. The nose lifted. The main gear pounded the pavement. Then, impact. Just seconds after passing V1, or the point of no return, the number 2 tire on the left main gear struck a thin, jagged strip of titanium lying on the runway. The tire burst instantly, but that was only the beginning. Fragments of rubber and metal shot upward at extreme velocity. One piece, nearly 5 kilograms, smashed into the underside of the left wing. It didn't pierce the fuel tank directly, but it hit with such force it caused a hydrodynamic pressure wave inside fuel tank number 5. The result was a 32-centimeter rupture in the tank wall. A section of the wing skin peeled open from the inside. Fuel began pouring out more than 60 liters per second. Then came the fire. A streak of orange erupted from beneath the left wing as the jet fuel ignited. Investigators would later determine that it was likely sparked by severed electrical wiring in the gear bay or contact with superheated engine parts. From the tower, controllers saw flames trailing the aircraft. Inside the cockpit, the crew still didn't know the exact cause, but they knew something was terribly wrong. The takeoff had become a race against time, one the aircraft wasn't equipped to win. Within seconds of the fire erupting, both left side engines began to falter. Engine 2 surged and dropped power. The flight engineer, responding to the fire warning, shut it down. Engine 1 recovered briefly, then began to fail. Now, Concorde was flying with just 2 working engines, on the right side only, and the gear was still down. The drag was immense. Worse still, with the aircraft's weight pushed back and its speed bleeding off, the pilots had almost no aerodynamic margin. The control surfaces struggled to keep her level. The aircraft lifted off the runway just barely and began to drift left. The cockpit voice recorder captured the strain, coordination, rapid checks, an attempt to salvage control. But even now, the aircraft was losing speed. Altitude remained pinned at 200 feet. The left wing, still ablaze, was beginning to fail structurally from the intense heat. There was nowhere to go. At 1400 hours, 43 minutes and 30 seconds, just 60 seconds after brake release, the crew made a final decision. They would attempt an emergency landing at Le Bourget Airport, just 8 kilometers away. Le Bourget. Le Bourget. Le Bourget, the co-pilot called out. But by now, it was too late. Engine 1 finally failed. With both left engines now dead and fire continuing to destroy critical flight surfaces, Concorde began to roll. The airspeed decayed further. It entered a stall. The aircraft rolled nearly 180 degrees before crashing nose first into the Hôtelissimo Les Relais Bleu Hotel in Gonesse. The explosion was immediate. All 109 on board died. So did 4 people on the ground. In just over 90 seconds, it was all over. Within hours, France's BEA began its investigation. They quickly found the titanium wear strip on the runway and matched it to a Continental DC-10 that had departed minutes earlier. The part had been installed improperly, non-compliant material, poor workmanship, a titanium piece instead of a softer approved alloy. This, the BEA concluded, was the initiating event. The strip burst the tire. The tire struck the wing. The fuel tank ruptured. The fire ignited. The engines failed. A chain reaction, lethal, fast, and unavoidable. But others weren't so sure it was that simple. In the months that followed, critics from across the aviation world began to point out what the official report barely acknowledged. The missing spacer in the landing gear, left out during maintenance, may have caused the aircraft to skew slightly left during the roll. That skew might have forced the aircraft to rotate earlier than planned, putting it right in the path of the debris. And what about the aft center of gravity? Or the extra fuel that hadn't burned off during taxi? Or the unmanifested luggage loaded at the last minute? Each detail, minor on its own, nudged the aircraft closer to a critical boundary. Even Concorde's design came under fire. Its fuel tanks weren't shielded. They were part of the wing structure, making them vulnerable to impacts from the very tire burst that had happened dozens of times before. In fact, Concorde had logged 57 tire-related incidents since entering service. 6 of them involved tank damage. None had caused a fire, until this one. In 2010, a French court found Continental Airlines and one of its mechanics guilty of involuntary manslaughter. They were fined and ordered to pay damages to Air France. But in 2012, the decision was overturned on appeal. The mechanic was cleared of criminal wrongdoing, though the airline still had to pay civil damages. The titanium strip was real, but so were Concorde's vulnerabilities. And while the courts debated legal blame, aviation experts were left to grapple with a deeper truth. This wasn't just a freak accident, it was a system, aircraft, operation, maintenance, and decision-making that had slowly eroded over time. All Concorde flights were suspended. It would be 16 months before they flew again, this time with reinforced Kevlar tank liners, improved Michelin tires, and armored wiring in the gear bay. But the damage was already done. Passenger confidence had vanished. Bookings dropped, and then came 911, another blow to luxury air travel. By 2003, both Air France and British Airways retired their fleets. The Concorde, a marvel of engineering speed and elegance, was gone. Not because it couldn't fly, but because it couldn't survive one more mistake. What happened that day in Gonesse wasn't just the end of a flight, it was the closing chapter in a story that had begun decades earlier, in boardrooms, hangars, and design labs. It exposed a hard truth in aviation. Even the most advanced machines are only as safe as the weakest link in their chain. The Concorde was fast, brilliant, beautiful, but it was not invincible. And on July 25, 2000, it was never given a real chance to recover. Aviation stories like this remind us how thin the line can be between brilliance and failure. The crash of Air France Flight 4590 didn't just ground a jet. It ended a dream that once defined the future of aviation. If you found this breakdown informative, consider subscribing. We cover stories like these with precision and care, so you can understand not just what happened, but why it mattered. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next one.